Hello and good evening, farmer friends. I just continue with our discussion on planning a dairy farm, uh, part two of it. Last week we had looked at heat stress and the impact of it on production and how important it is to select the right kind of housing suitable for a certain locality, certain climate. Today, we will talk about site selection. We will talk a little bit about climate and environment also. So let's go ahead and look at what are the requirements as far as site selection is concerned. The animal in the dairy veterinary world, livestock production world, we have the five freedoms uh, which set five basic rules concerning the welfare of animals. They apply to the housing of both large and small animals. And they are freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, and disease, freedom to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear and distress. Well, a housing that you provide for the cattle should essentially be able to uh, provide that kind of freedom for the animals. So while selecting a housing for the cut for your livestock, for here we're talking about dairy cows and buffaloes, site selection is very important. That includes the soil type, temperature, humidity, topography, access to the market, etc., water availability, suitability of different breeds to the different climates. We already talked about it. Choosing the right housing system, availability of trained and competent persons to handle the dairy farm, design, layout of the dairy farms, very important aspect of it. Milking parlor design and management, also very important aspect of milk production. Very ignored and neglected part is manure handling, but it is one of the most crucial parts of dairy farm planning and has to be taken up right, has to be thought about right at the beginning. Feed management, sourcing, cultivation, storage, and some other aspects. Uh, General considerations while selecting a site is water availability, drinking water for both the cattle as well as human beings staying and managing the farm. Water is used for other purposes like flushing manure if you have a manure flushing system, cleaning, cleaning the parlor. Climate, as we discussed, is very important. We're coming again and again to it. Plays a very important role in selecting the right type of housing that is appropriate for a certain climate. Topography and drainage. The topography is very important. You would rather not construct your cattle sheds or the barns in a low-lying area which could get flooded. It should be on a location on the site which you have selected, which is possibly the highest, also to facilitate gravity flow of manure. The soil type, if the soil is, for example, black cotton, deep soil, then you'll have to dig deep uh, to do the footing of your barns, and it is expensive. Also, the type of fodder that you can produce depends on the type of soil also. Area, how many animals are you going to house? How much area do you need for the whole housing is also an important aspect that needs to be considered while planning a dairy farm. Uh, how much area would you need to cultivate dry matter on dry matter basis for the whole year for 6 months at least? Sun angles. We will talk in depth about these sun angles and wind direction, ventilation, that is, uh, in the coming sessions. Availability of electricity is also an important aspect. Just introducing, if you haven't heard it before, the idea of moisture deficit, which is really evaporation minus rainfall. So there are certain areas, parts of the world where there is almost no rainfall, where the moisture deficit is more than 1,000. There, you could find the open coral type housing systems or feedlot type of housing systems are more suitable. You don't need to construct so much. Where there is little more rainfall, maybe in the tropical type of climates or semi-arid conditions, uh, much of India would fall into this category of moisture deficit category of less than 500, where freestall is the most appropriate. In many places in India, even corals would do, but unless they are completely covered, the bedding material, be it soil or be it manure, would get would absorb humidity, moisture, and also if there's rainfall into the sheds, it will make it very slushy and these animals sick due to that. So weather database for the locality is important for getting information regarding dry and wet bulb thermometry, wind velocity, wind directions, high and low temperature trends according to the season, temperature, humidity data throughout the year, sun movement, etc. These are basic data that you need to collect before deciding or selecting on what type of housing you would like to go in for. What are the main buildings on a dairy farm? Of course, you have the milk animal sheds, milking barns or the milking parlor. You have the calving sheds or calving pens. You have that is for pregnant dry animals. You have calf pens. You have a shed for young stock and heifers. You have the dry animal shed. Well, in case of buffaloes, some farmers would like to retain buffalo bulls or indigenous cows, have some bulls um, uh, for natural service. In that case, we need to consider bull sheds. Isolation sheds, if you're frequently purchasing animals from outside, it's good to have an isolation shed, preferably outside the farm, a few kilometers away if possible. A quarantine shed, sorry, that was a quarantine shed I talked about. Isolation shed in in a farm, if there is a sick animal and you suspect that could be some kind of a contagious disease, the animal could be temporarily isolated and tested for the disease and immediately removed from the farm. Shed for concentrate storage, silage bunkers, dry fodder storage, feed preparation area, manure storage area. These are all facilities that one would look for to develop on a farm. Manure storage, as I said, is out of this is a very crucial part. Just an example of how it would look. The different facilities on a shed, on a dairy barn. Going ahead, if you have multiple locations that you are looking for selecting, you could develop a scorecard like I did for a customer when we were evaluating different locations to develop a farm in Kerala. We looked at the total uh, cultivatability of the area, the temperature, the maximum temperature, maximum humidity, soil arability for fodder, water availability, distance from the main city, access, topography, road to the main city, the quality of the road, local labor availability, and then we scored it. Of course, in this case, there was a flat land called Mariyur on the Tamil Nadu border that was found to be most suitable for the farm. Coming closer to the shed or the farm, designing the shed or the farm in which you are housing the cattle, you have to remember there are three activities on the farm that you are labor intensive. For example, feeding. You need to feed at least once a day, if not two, 365 days of the year. You can use a trolley, a wheelbarrow, or a total mix ration feed mixer wagon. Manure handling needs to be done at least once a day. Some people do it once in 2 days. If it's a very dry atmosphere, once in 2 days would also be, again, depending on the housing type, would be okay. And milking, you need to milk twice a day, maybe thrice a day, 365 days of year. All these three activities are influenced by the housing design. So if you don't plan well, you would be stuck with a farm that you cannot dispose away for years together. So, what are the different types of housings that one could adopt when you're deciding on a farm? Look, the traditional conventional farms in India are tied up type, and this is an idea brought in by the Britishers, head-to-head system in all colleges, dairy colleges, and agriculture colleges, veterinary colleges, to instruct about head-to-head and tail-to-tail type of housing systems. But this is a concept that is more than 100 years old. Much of Europe has moved away from this concept into liberating the animals, giving them freedom, and permitting them to express their natural behavior. So I would strongly recommend, if possible, not to tie up the animals, or at least don't keep them confined, tethered the whole day. You have at least half the day where the animals are free and allowed to express their natural behavior. And that influences a lot of things like water intake, feed intake, reproduction, uh, even interaction between animals and things like that. So it's very important, especially in a country like India where the cow is worshipped. Why would you keep the poor Gomata tied up and punish her? You send a person to prison, take away his freedom of expressing natural behavior, and when you want to punish him, why would you want to punish the cow? So let her free, liberate her, and she will be happier and produce more. Give her access to 20 to water. Pani pilao, doodh badao. Okay, moving further. So tied up systems are one way of doing it, but in much of India there is a problem with very little availability of uh, area. So tied up systems persist, and there are tied up systems all over the world for different reasons. Uh, Today, we will talk only about tied up systems for larger farms with at least 50 or 100 cows or buffaloes. So, on another day, we will talk about housing for small farms and how it can be designed even with free housing within a very small space. Moving on, the other alternative is to keep them confined uh, under a roof in a single place, yet provide the facility for them to move around and behave normally. And that's possible through loose housing or freestall type of sheds. It's possible through open corrals, like in much of the Middle East and Far East, and even in the US, where you have large dairy farms with big feedlots for dual purpose cattle, especially. So, what does a tied up system look like? Just breezing through it, a tied up system where the animal is standing tail to tail is seen all over India, and I believe the animals in these sheds are not very comfortable, especially the flooring is concrete. It's hard and flooring, and so at least provide a rubber mat for the animals. At least provide 4 feet of width between every animal. Try to provide a partition between the animals. Like this, as you can see, you can easily put a partition between every cow and give her enough feed space as well as resting area. So a 2 meter by 1.2 meter area would be sufficient for a buffalo or a cow to sit down. So a shed would look like this with a central feeding alley. So if you design the one like this with a central feeding alley, you can run a tractor through it or a feed mixer wagon and feed on both sides. Whereas you can have water bowls on in between every two cows for them to drink whenever they want and have access to water. They can back out and you can have a free open space, a paddock where the animals can remain free in the night and can be tied up in the day. It's a kind of a combination kind of facility, which is also possible. Just to show you some examples of how a buffalo farm we had constructed in Yavatmal some years ago look like. So you can see that there are partitions, simple hot dip galvanized partitions between the sheds and the manure. As you see, the animals sit in one direction, so they are comfortable. They get enough space per animal. Manure falls in one direction, so the udder and the animal in general remains relatively clean and healthier. And there is a water bowl between every two cows or buffaloes, so that they can have access to water. As you can see in this picture, there's a central feed alley through which on a wheelbarrow fodder is fed to animals on both sides. Coming to free movement housing or open corrals, these are largely meant for uh, arid, semi-arid areas, drier areas. I have seen these farms in the Middle East, in Saudi, in Dubai, in the Al Marai, the Al Safi. All these farms look very similar, but many of them have desert cooling systems, which are quite effective also, but expensive. So if the climate is not going to go beyond say 35 degrees and the humidity not beyond 50%, then this kind of housing would still do pretty well. You please note that the water here is covered and there's a shade provided for the water for it to remain cool. There are open paddocks, open areas where the animal can are allowed to loaf around, and manure drops there, and manure is removed once in a week or maybe once in 2 weeks, depending on the weather and the practices of the farm. So the dry manure dries very quickly, and the animals walk over it, and it becomes a bedding material for the animals. And please notice that the animals are all in the shade here, except a few who are grazing. So in a corral-like condition, you need about 7 to 8 square meters of resting area for each animal. For young stock, only sunshades are sufficient, over 20 to 40 square meters per young stock uh, minimum, and about 2 to 3 square meters under the shade is sufficient for young stock and even heifers. It should need to have a central feed passage which is concreted about 3.5 to 3.6 meters, through which a tractor can travel and mix with a mixer wagon and feed the cows. In many farms, as I said, evaporating cooling in the resting area is provided so that the temperature inside the barn is much uh, cooler. Regular cultivation of soils where the animals rest is very important to prevent any kind of infect udder infections. You have free stalls, as you can see here, as a Swedish barn. You have you have resting cubicles on one side. This is a three-row barn. We will talk about different types of facilities as far as resting sheds, which are completely enclosed with resting cubicles are concerned. You can see that in a corner there's a milking parlor here, and on both sides there are two barns, and animals walk over from one side, go get milk, and then come out and back into their respective resting areas. So you have three rows of cattle, and you have two rows of manure alley and one row of the feeding alley. So you can go from 6 rows, one row to 6 rows. Uh, yeah, if it's a 6 row, then you need a 4 meter wide passage. If it's a 4 row, then you need a 4 meter wide passage. And smaller ones also need about 4 to 5 meters. You need changeover passages from one row to the other, for cattle movement from one side of the section to the other, and you need well planned return alleys for the cattle to move to the milking parlor and back. Feedlots are very similar to corrals, but much bigger. So you have more space per cow, and you have a central shade. And many of these shades have desert coolers or series of fans with foggers, so that the temperature in the shade is much lower than the temperature outside, which apparently, even if it's in Arizona, Mexico, and all those areas, it can in American continent, it could temperatures could be above 40, 45. Similarly, in Indian conditions and in the Middle East, similar conditions. So you need to provide good ventilation through fans and a shade with sufficient height. So this is one way of doing it. Just to show you an example of another feedlot. What is good for India? Well, this is what we suggest is a good solution for India, because we have 3 months of rain, and there is no guarantee that it will not rain in Punjab or even in Rajasthan or in the northern parts of India. Sometimes it rains heavily, and that creates, if it is an open to sky area, loafing area for the animal which is not covered, definitely that will the rains will come in there and it will become muddy. I have seen a lot of the farms in Punjab that have been developed with the design of they call it Israeli design, but I have seen them in the 3 months of rain, full of slush and animals getting completely damaged. Quite a large percentage of the herd getting mastitis. So a completely covered barn like this, a cross section like this, where you have a central feeding alley, and you have a central feeding alley through which a mixer wagon can pass through, feed the animals, and you have an animal standing area which can be scraped using a manure scraper, and then you have a soil undercover or under shade with a good overhang on both sides to protect the soil from um, uh, getting rain in the rainy season. On both sides also shades are necessary to prevent water coming in from both sides. A cross section of this barn would look like this. As you can see, you have the resting area, then you have the manure alley, then you have the feeding alley on both sides. You can have a group of 50 cows or maximum 75 cows in a group. And the length of the barn depends on how much land you have available. Don't make the barn sheds too long. I would say not more than 200 animals in one shed. Otherwise, the sheds become too long and difficult to manage. You could have In case you have lesser space, you could go in for a barn with resting cubicles, as you saw in the Swedish barn. You have a central feeding alley about 5 meters wide. Then you have a manure channel where the animals eat, and the manure falls into the manure channel and they go and rest. So this is also a possibility. Within this, there are different arrangements possible. You have a single row shed, as you can see here. Uh, as you can see in the cross section here, uh, you can have a single row shed, you can have a double row shed, different arrangements of a double row shed, and you could even have a three row shed. Floor space requirement for cattle and buffalo is about is covered area about 4 square meters for buffaloes and about 3.5 square meters for cows. And 1.2 square meters for the calves. As you can see, the pens can house about 50 animals. Open area is much more, about 7 to 8 square meters of open area. So, coming to the end of it, it is important. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail, said Benjamin Franklin. Spend time in studying each facility on the farm and plan. Get help from a specialist for planning. Once constructed, your farm remains for a long time, whether it is good or bad. It costs just as much to make a well-planned structure as it would to make a shabby one with shortcuts. So plan, plan, plan before you before you actually start construction. Cut those steel channels and I channels and Z channels, and once you cut it, you have to either weld it again or it's destroyed. So plan, plan, plan before you start construction. Thank you very much. We come again with our next episode very soon.